The Law of Dependent Arising, The Secret to Bondage and Release. Sermon 5 by Bhikkhu K, Ñāṇananda. Narrated by Bhikkhu Candana. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage be to the Fortunate One, the Worthy, fully enlightened. Sermon number 5. Pahankanua Sermon number 187. Akheya sanyino satta, akheya sming patichita, akheyang aparinyaya, yogamayanti machuno, akheyancha parinyaya, akhatarang namanyati, tanhitas nahotiti, yena nang vajja natas atti. Samidhi Sutta, Devata Sangyutta, from the Sanyutta Nikaya, the Connected Discourses. Beings are aware of what can be named. They take their stand on what can be named. By not fully understanding what can be named, they come back to go under the yoke of death. He who fully understands what can be named, and thinks not in terms of one who speaks, for such things do not occur to him, that by which they speak, that is not for him. Dear listeners, the teacher of the three realms, the fully enlightened Buddha, has revealed to us, through the law of dependent arising, that a good many of the problems, controversies, debates, and disputes in the world arise from linguistic conventions. The problem of samsara, which is the biggest problem, is also due to it. On the first full moon day of the new year, we have taken up as the topic of our sermon 2 verses relating to that aspect of linguistic usage. These 2 verses are found in the Samidhi Sutta of Sagataka Vagga in the Sangyutta Nikaya. There is an interesting introductory story to these 2 verses, which has a flavor of Dhamma in it. When the Buddha was staying at the Tapoda monastery in Rajagha, Venerable Samidhi woke up at dawn and went to the hot springs at Tapoda to bathe. Having bathed in the hot springs and come out of it, he stood in one robe, drying his limbs. Then a certain deity, who was exceedingly beautiful, illuminating the entire hot springs, approached Venerable Samidhi, and standing in the air, addressed him in verse. Abhutva bhikkhasi bhikkhu, nahi bhutavana bhikkhasi. Bhutvana bhikkhu bhikkhasu mātaṁ upacchaga. Not having enjoyed, you go for alms, monk. You do not go for alms, having enjoyed. Having enjoyed, monk, you go for alms. Let not the time pass you by. Abhutva bhikkhasi bhikkhu, monk, you have come to this monkhood which is dependent on alms, not having enjoyed the 5-fold sense pleasures. Nahi bhutvana bhikkhasi, not that you have come to monkhood after enjoying the sense pleasures. Bhutvana bhikkhu bhikkhasu, monk, go to monkhood having enjoyed the sense pleasures. Mātaṁ upacchaga, do not let the best time for enjoying sense pleasures, that is youth, pass you by. Here is an invitation that goes against the Dhamma, and here is the reply Venerable Samiddhi gave to it. Kalang vohang na janami, channo kalo nadissati, tasma abhutva bhikkhami, mamang kalo upacchaga. I do not know the time of death. Hidden is the time, it is not seen. That is why I go for alms without enjoying. Let not the opportune time pass me by. Kalang vohang na janami, I do not know when I have to die. Channo kalo nadissati, the time of death is hidden from me, it is not seen. Tasma abhutva bhikkhami, therefore I have come to monkhood without enjoying sense pleasures. Ma mangkalo upacchaga, with the thought, let not the opportune time for monkhood pass me by. The deity's advice was not to let the time for enjoying sense pleasures, that is youth, pass by. What Venerable Samiddhi says is that youth is the proper time for striving as a monk, since one cannot do it in decrepit old age. But the deity did not give up his attempt to mislead Venerable Samiddhi. He came down and standing on the earth said, Monk, you have gone forth while young with a lad's black hair, endowed with the radiant youth, without having dallied with sensual pleasures. Enjoy human sensual pleasures, monk. Do not abandon what is directly visible in order to pursue what takes time. Ma sandithikang hitva kalikang anudhavi. Venerable Samiddhi's rejoinder is exemplary. Friend, it is not that I abandon what is directly visible and run after what takes time. For the fortunate one has said that sensual pleasures involve time, are full of suffering and full of despair, and that the danger in them is still greater. Visible here and now is the Dhamma, immediate, inviting one to come and see, leading one onwards, to be personally experienced by the wise. And then the deity asks, But how is it, monk, that the fortunate one has said that sensual pleasures involve time, full of suffering, full of despair, and that the danger in them is still greater? How is it that this Dhamma is visible here and now, immediate, inviting one to come and see, leading one onwards, and to be personally experienced by the wise? But the Venerable Samiddhi said, Friend, I am newly ordained, a newcomer in this Dhamma and discipline. I cannot explain in detail. There is that fortunate one dwelling at the Tapoda monastery in Rajagha. You had better approach him and question him on this point. As he explains it to you, so you should bear in mind. However, the deity says, Monk, it is not easy for me to approach that fortunate one. He is always surrounded by other deities of great influence. If you go and question on this matter, we too will come to hear the Dhamma. Venerable Samiddhi agreed to the request and approached the Buddha and related the whole incident. That deity also was present. Then the Buddha addressed the above 2 verses to that deity. Akheya sanyino satta, akheyasming patiṭṭhita, akheyang apariññāya, yogamayanti machuno. These words might sound strange to some of you. If we go by etymology, kaya, the root of it, in akheya means to tell, and akhana is tale. Akheyang is therefore what has to be told. It can also mean what can be named or verbally conveyed. The perception of beings is based on the nameable. Akheya sanyino satta. They take their stand on what is named or expressed. Akheyasming paticca. Not having fully understood the nameable, akheyang aparinyaya, they come back again to go under the yoke of death. Yogamayanti machuno. Akheyancha parinyaya akhatarang namanyati. Tanhi tassa nahotiti yena nang vajja natassa ati. Then the other side of the position is given, which is relevant to the Arahant. Having fully understood the nameable for what it is, akheyancha parinyaya, he does not conceive of a speaker. Akhatarang namanyati. If the limitations of language are correctly understood, one does not take seriously the subject-object relationship. Such imagining is no longer there in him. Tanhi tassa nahotiti. Not for him is that by which one may speak of him. Yena nang vajja natassa ati. That means the Arahant has transcended linguistic limitations. Having uttered these two verses, the Buddha, as if challenging the deity's powers of understanding, said, Yakkha, if you understand, say so. Sometimes in the discourses, even for deities and gods, the word yakkha is used. It is not to be taken as a derogatory term here. Even the Sakka, king of the gods, is sometimes called a yakkha. Anyway, the deity confessed that he could not understand in detail what the Buddha has said in brief, and asked him to explain it in detail. As if to tease him, the Buddha uttered another deep verse. Samo visesi atharva nihino yo manyati so vivadetha tena tisu vidhasu avikampamano samo visesiti natassa hoti. He who conceives himself equal, superior, or inferior might thereby get involved in debate. But to one unshaken in the three grades of conceit, a fancying as equal or superior does not occur. Equal, samo, superior, visesi, and inferior, nihino, are the three grades of conceit. Whoever conceives in terms of these grades will dispute over them. But he who is unshaken by these three grades does not think in terms of equal or superior. With this verse as explanation, the Buddha again repeated the challenge. Yakkha, if you understand, say so. The deity confessed that he still cannot understand, and begged the Buddha once more for a detailed explanation. The Buddha responded by uttering a longer verse which goes even deeper than the previous one. Pahasi sankhang nacha mana majhaga achhechi tanhang idha namarupe tang chinnagantang anighang nirasang pariyesamana najhagamung devamanussa idha vahurang va saggesu va sabbanivesanesu. He cast off reckoning, no conceit assumed. Craving he cut off in this name and form. That bond-free one, from blemish and longing free, him no gods or men in their search could ken, searching here and beyond, in heavens and in all abodes. The verse sums up the accomplishments of an Arahant. Pahasi sankhang, he has given up reckoning. As we once explained, sankha is literally number. We pointed out that the numeral is the most basic or primary ingredient in a linguistic medium. You may have seen how dumb people converse counting on fingers. So we may call it a reckoning, a term denoting a characteristic of language in general. An arahant has given up reckoning. That is, he does not go by it. Nacha manamajjaga. He does not take up conceit. Achechi tanhang idha namarupe. He cut off craving in this name and form. We have pointed out that name is not bending, as traditionally explained, but that it is a collective term for feeling, perception, intention, contact, and attention, through which we get an idea of form, rupa, based on the four great primaries, earth, water, fire, and air. Wordlings are attached to this name and form, but the arahant has cut off that craving. Having severed that bond, tang chinnagantang, he is free from blemish and desire, anighang nirasang. Gods and men, searching for the object of an arahant's mind, cannot locate it in heavens or in other abodes. With this profound verse, the Buddha repeated the challenging words, Yakha, if you understand, say so. This time, the deity himself utters a verse in which he claims to give the detailed explanation of what the Buddha has preached in brief. Papang nakaira vachasa manasa kayena va kinchana sabbaloke kame pahaya satima sampajano dukkhanna sevetha anattha samhitang. Let one not do any evil by word or by mind, or else by body anywhere in this world. Giving up sense pleasures, mindful and fully aware, let one not form ally with suffering, bound up with woe. With that, the episode ends. One might wonder why the Buddha addressed such deep verses to the deity. It may be that the Buddha wanted to impress the deity of the depth of this Dhamma, since the latter made light of it by trying to mislead Venerable Samiddhi. Whatever it is, these verses are highly significant in revealing the Buddha's attitude to language. Let us try to analyze the meaning of these verses. Akkhayasanyino satta. The perception of the wordlings is language-oriented. Akkhayasming patiṭṭhita. They rely heavily on language. They are unaware of the limitations imposed on language by grammar and syntax. The subject-object relation is part and parcel of the linguistic medium. But the wordlings take it seriously. Akkhayang apariññāya yogamayanti machuno. By not fully understanding the nature of language, they come again and again to go under the yoke of death. On a previous occasion, while talking about namarupa, name and form, we brought up the simile of the dog on the plank. Later, we improved on that simile by relating the story of Narcissus. The handsome Greek youth Narcissus, who had never seen his own face, while roaming in a forest, bent down into a pond to wash his face. Seeing the reflection of his own face in the water, he imagined it to be an angel's, and fell in love with it. After a vain attempt to embrace it, he pined away and died by the pond. Narcissism as a term for self-love, now found in the dictionary, is reminiscent of that Greek youth. The sum total of the nameable is found in name and form, of which beings are conscious and on which they take their stand. By not understanding fully name and form, beings go under the yoke of death. Take, for instance, the case of a wealthy man. What is the self-love that comes up at the moment of his death? How can I part with this house and property? How can I leave behind my wife and children? That is the name and form he grasps, the reflection of his own self. In that grasping there is a longing for another birth. Oh, give me a chance to fulfill my desire. There you are, says Mara, and gives him not exactly what he wants, but what he deserves according to his kamma. So he comes back to his own house, either as a rat, a snake, or as a frog. Or else he comes back to sit on his own chair as a dog. That is how one takes one's stand on the nameable. Akkheyasming patiṭṭhita. Worldlings are involved in an interrelation between consciousness and name and form. They are not aware that name and form is only a reflection. That is what the Buddha makes known to the world. If one takes one's stand on name and form, one comes under the yoke of death. There is another reason for our choice of this particular topic for today's sermon. You might remember that in a previous sermon we discussed at length an extremely important discourse, which our commentarial tradition has not taken seriously, namely the Nibbāna Sutta. We showed how the Buddha explained to Venerable Ñāṇananda the interconnection between name and form, as well as the interrelation between name and form and consciousness. Although we quoted the highly significant passage in which the Buddha sums up that exposition, we could not explain it the other day. It is with the aim of paving the way for a discussion of that passage that we brought up the above two verses as the topic today. First of all, let me cite that passage in full. Ittavata ko ānanda jāyet va jiyet va miyet va chavet va uppajjet va ittavata adhivachana patho ittavata niruttipatho ittavata panyatipatho ittavata panyavacharang ittavata vattang vattati itthattang panyapanaya yadidang namarupang saha vinyanena. Insofar only, Ananda, can one be born, grow old, or die, or pass away, or reappear. Insofar only is there a pathway for verbal expression. Insofar only is there a pathway for terminology. Insofar only is there a pathway for designation. Insofar only is there a sphere of wisdom. Insofar only is there a whirling round for a designation of thisness. That is to say, as far as name and form, together with consciousness. Now for an explanation. Here, the Buddha is telling Venerable Ñāṇananda that one could be said to be born, to grow old, or die, or pass away, or reappear, that there is a pathway for verbal expression, or terminology, or designation, that there is any scope for wisdom, and a whirling round for designating a thisness. All these are traceable to a connection between name and form and consciousness. The range of wisdom extends as far as consciousness and name and form. The most important declaration is that there is a whirling round for a designation of thisness. Ittavata vattang vattati itthattang panyapanaya. We have explained earlier the meaning of the term itthatta. Ittang means this. So itthatta is thisness. It stands for the state of this existence. Therefore, the phrase in question means that there is a whirling round for designating this state of existence. You had better recall the simile of the vortex. Only when there is a vortex or a whirlpool in the ocean can one point out a there or here. In order to explain this whirling round between two things, we cited the change of prices in the market based on supply and demand. In fact, all forms of existence are traceable to an interrelation between consciousness and name and form. This, then, is the samsaric vortex. When we see how a whirlpool in the sea or in a river draws in the flotsam and jetsam around it, we point it out, saying, there or here. Likewise, we call a heap of grasping a live whirlpool, a person. The first person is, of course, I myself. You are the second person, and he over there is the third person. At least there has to be the latent conceit am, asmimana, to justify existence. With the recognition of this person, the entire repertoire of grammar and syntax falls into place. Here I am, yonder you are, and there he is. This is the basic framework for grammar. The Buddha points out to us that it is because we are enslaved by the grammatical superstructure that we cannot understand Nibbāna and put an end to samsara. But if one reflects deeply, one would discover that the grammar itself is the product of ignorance and craving. Because of these, the worldlings get enslaved to linguistic usages. They do not understand the pragmatic purpose of linguistic usage. They think that the grammar of language conforms to the grammar of nature. The Buddha, on the other hand, revealed to the world that language is merely a convention of limited applicability. Let me mention another point that is relevant to this subject. Once a deity raised a question in the Buddha's presence regarding a doubt which even some of you might entertain. It is worded in the form of a verse, but we shall give the gist of it. He asks why the arahants who have accomplished the task still go on using such expressions as I say, ahang vadami, and they tell me, mamang vadanti. Is it because they still have conceit, mana, in them? The Buddha explains that the arahant has given up bonds of conceit, but that he uses the worldly parlance only as a way of speaking. Loke samanyang kusalo viditva, voharamatena so vohareya. Being skillful in knowing the worldly parlance, he uses such expressions merely as a convention. Not only the arahants, but the Buddha himself uses such words as I and mine, only by way of convention. So you may understand that the fault is not in using worldly conventions, but in being unaware of the fact that it is merely a convention. It is due to the ignorance of this fact that all logicians, philosophers, and scientists have got stuck in the word and created a lot of confusion for themselves and for others to languish long in samsara. There is a wonderful maxim made known by the Buddha which throws more light in this hidden aspect of language. The term akheya sanyino, literally, percipient of the expressible, reveals the close connection between perception and linguistic convention. The worldlings are in the habit of taking in perception. This perception has a connection with linguistic usage. The Buddha draws our attention to this fact with the following declaration, which is like a maxim. Voharave pakkahang bhikkave sanyang vadami yatha yatha nang sanjanati tatha tatha voharati evang sanyi aho sinti. Monks, I say perception has as its result linguistic usage. In whatever way one perceives, just in that way one makes it known, saying, I was of such a perception. The word vipaka, implicit in the expression vohara vipakahang, is not to be confused with kamma vipaka, or kammic result. It only means that perception matures into linguistic usage. In whatever way one perceives, so one makes it known. One does not stop at perception. There is an urge to express it, to make it known to others. There comes in the need for language. The way one conveys it to others is, I was of such a perception, or I was percipient in this way. One is already involved by saying so. In our writings we have explained the term papancha sanya sankha as reckonings born of prolific perception. Through prolific perception, wordlings get caught up in language. Sankha as reckoning includes not only numerals, but linguistic usage as well. It is very important to understand the connection between perception and linguistic usage. This understanding helps us to solve the problem of existence, bhava, which is apparently insoluble. When it is said that perception gives rise to linguistic usage, one can ask whether it is possible to be free from the bane of perception. There are some discourses which, until recently, have escaped the serious attention of scholars, where it is said that the arahants, when they are in the attainment called the fruit of arahanthood, are free from all perception. Whatever there is in the world that could be regarded as an object of perception, from all that they are free while in that supramundane state. There are quite a number of discourses describing that extraordinary attainment. For instance, in the Sandha Sutta, we find the Buddha explaining to Venerable Sandha the nature of that samadhi. Within the context of a simile about an excellent thoroughbred of a horse, the Buddha calls an arahant an excellent thoroughbred of a man, bhadro purisa janiyo, and describes the nature of this concentration. It is said that in him the perception of earth, water, fire, and air, as well as other perceptions, are not there. There are many who raise the question whether materiality is fully negated and only mind is asserted in this Dhamma. We gave a certain simile to illustrate the correct standpoint. Suppose a blind man, in his groping, hits against a block of ice. He might come back with a perception of earth in it. When he approaches it the next time, it is getting heated, and he would come back with a perception of fire. By the time he goes there again, it has melted, and he returns with a perception of water. When he goes there for the fourth time, it is evaporating, and he brings back a perception of air. To make this simile meaningful, we may compare the worldling to that blind man. The four great primaries, chattaro mahabhuta, cannot be recognized as they are, because they are always found as a combination. They can be distinguished only according to their intensity by means of constituents of the name group: feeling, perception, intention, contact, and attention. Because of the feeling of hardness at the collision, that blind man got a perception of earth in the block of ice. That way, name and form are inextricably interwoven. That we called the tangle within, antojata. The tangle without, bahijata, is the interrelation between name and form and consciousness, for which the doting on his own image by Narcissus is an illustration. The entire samsaric puzzle is traceable to this vortex of existence. How does word and concept aggravate this situation? The worldling, like that blind man, thinks that there is a thing called earth, a thing called water, a thing called fire, and a thing called air. Surely can one deny these things? In the Sandha Sutta, there is a complete list of such things, a perception of which is not there in the attainment of the fruit of arahanthood, the realm of infinity of space, the realm of infinity of consciousness, the realm of nothingness, as well as the seen, the heard, the sensed, and the cognized. Existence as a whole has ceased. Whatever perception there is, characteristic of existence, whatever object of the mind there can be, from all that thoroughbred of a man is free while in the Arahata Phala Samadhi. The way the Buddha winds up that sermon is highly significant. Having said that the excellent thoroughbred of a man does not meditate, Ñāṇananda, on any of the possible objects of concentration, the Buddha emphatically asserts in the end that he does meditate. Jayati Chipana. Now comes the impressive final declaration. Evang jayincha pana sandha bhadrang purisa janiyang sainda deva sabrahmaka sapaja patika arakava namasanti. Namo te purisa janya, namo te purisuttama, yassa te nabhijanama, yampi nisaya jayasiti. Sandha, the thoroughbred of a man, thus meditating, the gods with Inda, with Brahma, and with Pajapati, even from afar, bow down, saying, Homage to you, O thoroughbred of a man! Homage to you, most excellent of men! For what it is on which you meditate, that we can never comprehend. This is the marvel of a Dhamma that transcends the world. The Buddha has presented this transcendental Dhamma through the Arahata Phala Samadhi, concentration of the fruit of arahanthood. This is none other than the experience of the cessation of existence, bhava nirodha. It is, at the same time, the cessation of the six sense spheres, salayatana nirodha. All the six sense spheres are rendered inactive. It is within these six that all the turmoil of the world goes on. During that extraordinary concentration, the existence has ceased. It is in fact a reverting to an experience already gone through at the attainment of arahanthood. That is why we pointed out that the arahants are not reborn by virtue of the fact that their last thought is this cessation of existence. Bhava nirodho Nibbānaṃ. Nibbāna is the cessation of existence. The arahants experience the taste of Nibbāna while in this paradoxical samadhi. All this shows that this is an extraordinary Dhamma. The question of language is also implicit in the solution offered. When the mind is fully liberated from perception, it is completely free from objects. We have earlier mentioned the terms used with reference to the emancipated mind: appatiṭṭhaṃ, appavattaṃ, anarammanam. That mind is not established anywhere. It has no continuity or existence, and it has no object. Bhava, or existence, has ceased. The realization of cessation is itself the deliverance. That is, Nibbāna, nothing else. There is a lot of controversy among scholars regarding Nibbāna. Some would even call our interpretation nihilistic. Let me therefore bring up something special from this point onwards. In an earlier sermon, we have already mentioned what the Buddha had said about consciousness. The nature of the consciousness of an arahant and the emancipation meant by Nibbāna can be understood in the light of what we have discussed so far. If we are to clarify further in terms of the simile of the vortex, it is as if the vortex has ceased. As a matter of fact, this simile of the vortex or the whirlpool is not something we have arbitrarily introduced. It is there in the discourses as a word of the Buddha, but the commentarial tradition has ignored it. Commentators have not understood its true significance. There is a very important verse in the Udana that can be quoted in support of this. It comes as a paean of joy uttered by the Buddha in praise of Venerable Lakuntabhaddiya, who was an arahant. Acchechi vattang biyaga nirasang visukha sarita nasandati chinnang vattang navattati esevantu dukkhassa. The whirlpool he cut off and reached the desireless. Streams dried up, flow no more. The whirlpool cut off, whirls no more. This itself is suffering's end. He cut off the whirlpool or vortex. That is to say, the whirling around between consciousness and name and form has been cut off. Thereby he reached the desireless, biyaga nirasang. The current of water is dried up and flows no more. The whirlpool, thus cut off, no more whirls. And this itself is the end of suffering. Supposing a whirlpool in the ocean comes to cease. As long as there is a whirlpool, we can point out a here and a there, this place and that place, or personifying it, this person and that person. But once the whirlpool has ceased, all these words lose their point of reference. Now there is only the wide expanse of the ocean as it was before the whirlpool came in. That foolish current of water went in search of permanence in an impermanent world. It was a perversion, pure and simple. If at any point of time that current of water got dried up, there is no whirlpool or vatta any more. This is the whole story going by the vatta terminology. But strangely enough, the commentators brought in some other kind of vatta to explain Paṭicca Samuppāda. They speak of kamma vatta, kilesa vatta, and vipaka vatta. Kamma round, defilement round, and resulting round. They have fully ignored the most important story of the round. You all can now form some idea about Nibbāna, about the arahant's mind, and about the objectless mind. Because of this charge of nihilism, let me touch upon another aspect of the problem. While discussing Mahatanha Sankhya Sutta in the previous sermon, we said that the Buddha had compared consciousness to a fire. As you know, there are 6 consciousnesses: eye consciousness, ear consciousness, and so on, inclusive of mind consciousness. The Buddha has pointed out that each of these consciousnesses is like a specific fire, dependent on a specific type of fuel. For instance, consciousness dependent on eye and forms is eye consciousness. It arises only in dependence and not otherwise. Apart from that, there is no consciousness either in the eye or in forms. Because of eye and forms arises eye consciousness. Because of ear and sounds arises ear consciousness, and so on. What is the simile that the Buddha has given to illustrate this point? A fire that burns dependent on logs is called a log fire. A fire that burns dependent on faggots is called a faggot fire. And a fire that burns dependent on chaff is called a chaff fire. There is no abstract fire. It is always a specific fire. The Buddha compared the 6 kinds of consciousness to 6 kinds of fire. There is no independent consciousness to be called the consciousness. Whatever has arisen due to causes and conditions has of necessity to cease when these causes and conditions are not there. It is when all the six consciousnesses, namely eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness, cease that there is a deliverance, which is also called viññāṇupasama, appeasement of consciousness. As you all know, it is compared to the going out of a lamp, as we find in the famous verse in the Ratana Sutta. Kīnaṃ purānaṃ navaṃ nati sambhavaṃ viratta citta āyatike bhavasmiṃ te khīna bija avirulhichanda nibbanti dhīra yathāyam padipo. Extinct is the old, nothing new to arise. Detached in mind as to future existence, they of extinct seed, with no desire to sprout, go out like this lamp, those prudent ones. The verse figuratively conveys the situation at the last moment of the life of the Arahants. Kīnaṃ purānaṃ. All past kamma is finished. Navaṃ nati sambhavaṃ. There is no arising of new kamma. Viratta citta āyatike bhavasmiṃ. They are detached in mind as to future existence. Te khīna bija. Their consciousness seed is extinct. Avirulhichanda. Therefore, no desire can sprout forth in them. Nibbanti dhīra yathāyam padipo. The prudent ones get extinguished even like this lamp. The simile of the going out of a flame comes up again in the Upasiva Manavapucca in the Sutta Nibbāna. Acchiyatha vata vegena kitto atthaṃ paleti na upeti sankham evaṃ muni namakaya vimutto atthaṃ paleti na upeti sankham. Like the flame thrown off by the force of wind, goes to its end and comes not within reckoning, so the sage, when released from the name group, goes to its end and comes not within reckoning. Acchiyatha vata vegena khitto. Just as a flame thrown off by the force of wind, atthaṃ paleti na upeti sankham, goes to an end and cannot be reckoned as gone somewhere. Evaṃ muni namakaya vimutto. Even so, the sage released from the name group, atthaṃ paleti na upeti sankham, comes to his end and cannot be reckoned or predicated. Upasiva is puzzled by this verse and implores the Buddha to explain further. Atthaṃ so udavaso nati udahu ve sassatiya arogo taṃ ve muni sadhu vyakarohi tathahi te vidito esa dhammo. Has he reached his end, or does he not exist at all? Or else is he eternally hale, not ill? That to me explain well, O sage, for this Dhamma as such is known by you. Upasiva is asking reverentially whether that sage has gone to the end, or whether he does not exist any more, or else is eternally free from disease. Now the Buddha clarifies it further in the following verse, with which the discourse ends. But unfortunately, many scholars are confused over the grand finale. Atthaṃ gatasana pamanamati yena nang vajju taṃ tassa nati sabbesu dhammesu samuhatesu samuhata vadapathapi sabbe. Of one who has reached his end, no measure is there. That by which they may speak of him, that is not for him. When all objects of mind are rooted out too are all paths of debate. The Arahant who has reached his end is beyond reckoning. He cannot be measured. Name and form is that by which others may speak of him, but that he has given up. When all objects of the mind, which were listed above, are eradicated, all pathways of debate and controversy, such as the dilemma and the tetralemma of the logicians, are rendered ineffective. Logic is imprisoned between is and is not. Dhamma is beyond the pale of logic. Atakka vacharo. It is like the fire extinguished. This is an extremely clear-cut answer, but scholars have confounded the issue. However, some Buddhist philosophers have correctly understood this position. Ashvaghosha, both a philosopher and poet, has beautifully presented this simile in his Sanskrit epic Saundarananda. Dipo yatha nirvruting abhyupeto naivavaning gacchati nantarikshang dishang na kanchit vidishang na kanchit snehakshayat kevelameti shanting evang kruti nirvruting abhyupeto naivavaning gacchati nantarikshang dishang na kanchit vidishang na kanchit kleshakshayat kevalameti shanting. Even as the flame of a lamp, when it goes out, goes not to the earth nor to the firmament, not to any direction, nor to a sub-direction, by exhaustion of oil only reaches appeasement. So too the accomplished one, when gone to extinction, goes not to the earth nor to the firmament, not to any direction, nor to a sub-direction. By extinction of taints only reaches appeasement. When the flame of a lamp goes out by the exhaustion of oil, one cannot say that it has gone to the earth or to the sky, or to any direction or sub-direction. All one can say is that it has got extinguished. The term kruti stands for an arahant who has done his task, katakaraniya. He cannot be traced after his final attainment of parinibbāna, even like the flame of the lamp. So it seems that although we started with Paṭicca Samuppāda as our topic, it automatically leads to a discussion of Nibbāna. As a matter of fact, Nibbāna cannot be understood without a knowledge of Paṭicca Samuppāda. Therefore, let me add a special message at this point that could be helpful to those who listen to these sermons. 20 years ago, when I was at Mitrigala Nissarana Vanaya, I happened to deliver 33 sermons on Nibbāna to the group of meditating monks there. After a number of years, the Dhamma Publications Trust of Colombo, DGMB, published those 33 sermons in 11 volumes. An English translation also came out in 7 volumes called Nibbāna, the Mind Stilled. The Audio Trust in Kandy, DSMB, circulated those sermons and their translation in CDs and through its website all over the world. In those sermons on Nibbāna, we had occasion to say something on Paṭicca Samuppāda as well. However, now a new series titled Pahankanuwa Paṭicca Samuppāda Sermons is just coming up. This is the 5th sermon. I do not know how many sermons would make up this series. Let time decide it. Though the topic of the series is Paṭicca Samuppāda, one cannot help discussing Nibbāna as well. There is an episode which clearly shows the connection between these two topics. You may have heard that the Buddha, after his enlightenment, reflected on the depth of this Dhamma. It is said in Ariyapariyesana Sutta that after comprehending this wonderful Dhamma, which is so profound, hard to see and hard to understand, peaceful and sublime, the Buddha wondered how the worldlings can understand such a Dhamma. It occurred to him then that there are two truths which it is hard for the worldlings to see, namely, specific conditionality, idappacchayata, or dependent arising, Paṭicca Samuppāda, and the stilling of all preparations, the relinquishment of all assets, the extinction of craving, detachment, cessation, Nibbāna. It is because worldlings are confined within linguistic conventions that they cannot understand the links of the formula of dependent arising. They are imprisoned by logic and compelled to assert is or is not, absolute existence or absolute non-existence. But the correct position is otherwise. We have clearly pointed out that the basic principle of the law of dependent arising is, this being, this comes to be. With the arising of this, this arises. This not being, this does not come to be. With the cessation of this, this ceases. Here itself is the transcendence of logic, atakavachara. Logic wants us to say yes or no to the question of existence. But this is what the Buddha says. Worldlings find it difficult to take it in. They think that when an arahant finally passes away, he could be located somewhere. In this law of dependent arising, there is a direct order and a reverse order. In the direct order, we have the nature of samsara as it is. Venerable Sariputta became a stream winner already as the ascetic Upatissa, when he heard only the first two lines of the verse uttered by Venerable Assaji. Ye dhamma hetupabbhava te sanghetum tathagato aha. Whatever things that arise from causes, their cause the Tathagata has told. Upatissa inferred by it that if something arises from a cause, it has of necessity to cease when the cause ceases. The last two lines are on Nibbāna. Te sanchayo nirodho evang vadi mahasamano. And also their cessation, thus teaches the great ascetic. If a problem is properly understood, the solution is also in it. The direct order of the law of dependent arising is the statement of the problem. The reverse order gives the solution. It is very difficult for the worldlings to understand that they are incarcerated between is and is not. Given ignorance, a series of conditioned phenomena come to be. With the cessation of ignorance, they cease to be. There is an extremely important discourse which highlights these distinctive features of the Dhamma. Let us briefly touch upon it for the present. It is the Kaccanagotta Sutta of the Sangyutta Nikāya. A monk, Kaccanagotta by name, approaches the Buddha and says, Venerable Sir, right view, it is said. In what way, Venerable Sir, is there right view? You may have heard various definitions of right view. Here is something peculiar. The Buddha says, Dvayanisito kvayang kaccana loko ye bhuyyena nathitancha eva nathitancha loka samudayam ko kacchana yatha bhutang sammappanyaya passato ya loke nathitasa nahoti loka nirodhang ko kacchana yatha bhutang sammappanyaya passato ya loke athitasa nahoti. This world, kacchana, for the most part, depends upon a duality, upon the notion of existence and the notion of non-existence. For one who sees the arising of the world as it really is, with correct wisdom, there is no notion of non-existence in regard to the world. And for one who sees the cessation of the world as it really is, with correct wisdom, there is no notion of existence in regard to the world. Here the Buddha points out that the world is resting on the two extreme views of existence and non-existence. Then, this is how the Buddha shows us the middle way. For one who sees the arising of the world as it is, with correct wisdom, there is no notion of non-existence. To the insight meditator who sees the arising aspect of the world, the notion of absolute non-existence does not occur. And to the insight meditator who sees the cessation aspect of the world, the notion of absolute existence does not occur. The world is holding on to the two dogmatic views of absolute existence and absolute non-existence. But the Buddha avoids this absolutism. Paṭicca Samuppāda means arising in dependence on causes and conditions. The world is incessantly arising and ceasing, but the worldling, resting on the notion of the compact, due to craving and grasping, tenaciously believes that a thing exists absolutely. If absolute existence is one end, the other end should be absolute non-existence, tantamount to annihilation. But as we sometimes pointed out, if anything is lost, it is only the ignorance that there is something, and the craving that there isn't enough. That is all. There is nothing to lament. This is precisely why Gautama Buddha, as well as Vipassī Buddha, made known their realization with the words, Samudayo samudayoti ko me bhikkave pubbe ananussute su dhammasu chakkhung udapadi ñāṇaṃ udapadi paññā udapadi vijjā udapadi āloko udapadi nirodho ti ko me bhikkave pubbe ananussute su dhammasu chakkhung udapadi ñāṇaṃ udapadi, paññā udapadi, vijjā udapadi, āloko udapadi. Arising, arising. Thus, monks, in regard to things unheard before, there arose in me the eye, the knowledge, the wisdom, the science, the light. Cessation, cessation. Thus, monks, in regard to things unheard before, there arose in me the eye, the knowledge, the wisdom, the science, the light. The process of arising and cessation is going on all the time. But the worldling has taken up the wrong view called Sakkaya Ditthi, personality view, misconstruing the whole group to be existing, Sat plus Kaya. Because of that view, they are imprisoned by the limitations of language and logic, which rest on the duality of absolute existence and absolute non-existence. Not only the ordinary worldling, but the worldly philosopher as well as the modern scientist has got stuck there. Not being satisfied with the dilemma, the philosopher has created a tetralemma to make the confusion worse. Confounded. But the Buddha has transcended all these by this Dhamma, which is Atakka Vachara, not moving within the sphere of logic. He transcended logic the moment he gained the insight into the incessant arising and ceasing. He understood that it is not possible to take a definite stand on is or is not. Let me give a simple illustration for your easy comprehension, a simile I gave in my sermons on Nibbāna. I suppose you all like similes. Sometimes behind a shop window or in a showroom, they display a magic kettle, from which water flows non-stop into a basin under it. The kettle never goes empty, nor does the basin overflow. That is the magic. The secret is that there is a hidden tube which conducts the water back into the kettle. Well, take it that the world itself is a magic kettle. The process of arising and ceasing is going on all the time, even within our bodies. So also in the world outside. World systems go on arising and ceasing, expanding and contracting, vivatta and sangvatta. This is the profound truth the Buddha has revealed to the world. But the worldlings, committed and limited as they are by personality view, and enslaved as they are by perception, by language and logic, come again and again under the yoke of death. Yoga mayanti machuno. Well, enough for today. I hope you will bear with me if some explanations appeared too deep. But you need not complain like that deity. Perhaps when the sermon comes in a form of a CD, you can absorb it quietly. I take it that you all have spent the day observing higher precepts in a meditative atmosphere with Nibbāna as your aim. I wish this sermon too will help you realize your noble aspirations. Whatever beings there be, from the lowest hell to the highest Brahma world, may they all rejoice in our sermon. May the merits accrued by that rejoicing conduce to the fulfillment of their higher aims. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.